Ladies and gentlemen, to begin our conference proceedings with commencement address, I would request Honorable Rector NUST and President NSTP, Engineer Javed Mahmood Bukhari, to kindly deliver his opening remarks.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Mr. Shibli Faraz, Honorable Federal Minister for Science and Technology, Dr. Akhtar Nazir, Federal Secretary, Ministry of Science and Technology, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my profound privilege to welcome you to the first ever Venture Capital Conference being organized under the auspices of Ministry of Science and Technology. We are indeed very grateful to Mr. Shibli Faraz, Minister for Science and Technology, for such a remarkable drive in pushing forward with the government's agenda of wealth creation in our society through the promotion of young entrepreneurs. Sir, your initiative, which is so relevant to the current economic and technological landscape of our country, is being undertaken at a time when the world is in the process of recovering from the aftermath of the pandemic. And there is immense global and national appetite for the investments in high-tech and innovative businesses, especially the startups, for which we greatly admire your leadership and vision. I also wish to pay compliments on behalf of complete NUST fraternity to Mr. Akhtar Nazir, the respected Federal Secretary of the Ministry of Science and Technology, for partnering with us in promoting the culture of innovation and quality research and, of course, its commercialization. Sir, your patronage has been most definitely very helpful in creating enabling environments for the venture capitals as well as our startups. Ladies and gentlemen, the past 2 years have been phenomenal for Pakistani startups in terms of attracting investments and raising funds from international venture capital investors. In this context, it is worth mentioning that Pakistani startups have attracted over $300 million of investment in this year so far, which is more than the combined investment obtained in the previous 6 years. So, ladies and gentlemen, we at NUST firmly believe that something remarkable is happening with respect to the viability and credibility of Pakistani market, which is drawing interest of international investors. Here I consider it important to highlight that NUST has one of the most rigorous and comprehensive knowledge ecosystem in Pakistan's higher education sector. The university prides itself in the quality of its academics and applied focus on its research. But in addition to these standard modes of university teaching, NUST students also undergo entrepreneurial studies, social responsibility experiences, and industrial internships, while also getting frequent opportunities to develop and display their problem-solving skills. This university experience culminates in every student being encouraged to create startups through the free pre-incubation training and exposure to the country's biggest and most viable incubation space at our National Science and Technology Park, or NSTP as we call it. Ladies and gentlemen, our NSTP is playing a very vital role in bringing together academia and the industry. This inclusivity of NSTP is evident from the fact that there are as many as 100+ companies housed at NSTP, owned by Pakistanis, foreigners, and expats. The facility provides the startups an unmatched opportunity to interact with and learn from the established companies, while giving the larger companies a chance to invest in or acquire the growing startups. We have already started discerning impressive results of this amazing ecosystem, as only in 2 years of its existence, it has created over 1,000 jobs, offered 500 internships, and added millions of dollars to the national economy. The ecosystem is now ripe for venture capital investments to take it to its next natural step. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, it is extremely important that we come out of this conference with a concrete plan to take the vital next steps in policy making, to allow these young, fertile minds to play their critical role in Pakistan's growth as the latest hub of high-tech knowledge economy. Ladies and gentlemen, I once again wish to offer my gratitude to the Honorable Minister and the distinguished guests for being with us today. My best wishes to the Honorable Secretary, Ministry of Science and Technology, in his very vital efforts towards implementation of the government's agenda. I thank you all, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. Next, we would like to invite respectable co-founder and managing partner of Zain Capital, Mr. Faisal Aftab, to kindly, representing the VC industry, to kindly deliver his keynote address. Thank you.
Honorable Chief Guest, government and NUST dignitaries, thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's really a pleasure to be here to see that such a conference is taking place by the Ministry of Science and Technology and such a great institution such as NUST. So it's great to see that things are progressing forward. What I would like to say is that I'd like to define what is happening and why so much money is coming into Pakistan and what's changed for Pakistan. So if I were to go back to history, the same changes that took place between 1914 and 1945, between World War I and World War II, are taking place today. And that was the confluence of two events: a rising empire, the United States, which was an industrial empire, disrupting an existing empire, which was the United Kingdom, which was primarily an agrarian empire. And that was also the disruption of two different systems, which was the industrial age, disrupting the landed class, the princely states, and the monarchies. And that same event is playing out today, starting from the year 2000, where the information age started to pick up steam. And as of 2020, it has officially disrupted the industrial age. A case in point for this would be to look at the S&P 500 in the US, which was 10% the aggregate market cap. 10% was tech 10 years ago. Today, 30% is big tech, made up of about 5 companies known as the FAMs, or more recently now known as the MAMs, since Facebook is called Meta. Fast forward to 2030, and what you're going to see is the most rapid adoption of tech at a global scale. And the S&P 500, along with many of the companies offered in public markets, are going to be technology-based. So why has Pakistan become so important in this entire equation? While we may have missed the boat in the industrial age, we are probably poised to capture the data age with our population. Something that was not an asset for us in the industrial age has suddenly turned into an asset with resources, the 5th most populous country in the world, an undocumented country. Documented GDP in Pakistan is probably close to 300 billion to 315 billion. Our undocumented economy is probably closer to $900 billion. What is taking place is platform plays, which I'd like to define as different than software export or hardware plays. Platform plays are a digital footprint of the real world businesses. In technology, everything is captured. There's no concept of an informal economy or hiding from authorities in terms of your revenue numbers. And that's what's playing out where you're seeing so many of these companies scaling at such a rapid pace. We as venture capitalists, as we've been investing for the last 3-4 years, are seeing the momentum pick up where value has been extracted from the surrounding regions, namely Southeast Asia, India, China, and the MENA region. So Pakistan is suddenly the most valuable asset on this planet. This is also linked to the exchange of value disruption that the world is in today. So the internet moves in layers. And that layer was the TCP/IP data layer, which was postal systems being disrupted by email. Video over IP disruption, voice over IP disruption, which was landline telephones and long distance communication being disrupted by platforms like Skype, WhatsApp, Viber. Video over IP disruption, which is linear and satellite, being disrupted by Netflix and YouTube. Today is the merger of money with the internet, and that has a profound implication on Pakistan, given that at least $600 to $700 billion of value that is today exchanged in cash will be unlocked, and that leapfrogs us into a G20 country. Our focus is to invest in the youth of this country. The youth makes up 70% of the population is below the age of 30. Their neural connectivity is very different than people of my age. I'm 45 plus, so I'm already obsolete in this industry. These children have grown up with the information at the tip of a finger. And many of them at 26 and 32 have a faster neural synapse than most of us. And they know how to figure out problems, solve them. So institutions like NUST and what they're doing in terms of creating an environment for these young individuals through a selection process, obviously. I believe the acceptance rates for NUST is probably, it's tougher than Harvard, I think, to get in when you look at those numbers. So the smartest minds have come together in these institutions, allow them to progress forward, allow them to innovate, and that is what's going to carry this country forward. And as a venture capitalist, I think all I can really request is let the private sector take this forward. The government should be there to facilitate and allow this transformation to take place in a natural way. The only thing I will say is that data is extremely important. So from a policy point of view, we must focus on protecting our data. In the information age, data is the new oil. And that is the ultimate crux of what Pakistan must not miss out on in order to be a major part of this equation. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for a very informative speech. Ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned earlier, we now request the working groups to present their policy statements to this August gathering. The modus operandi would be that I would call a representative member of each working group listed on the screen to come on stage one by one and present their respective findings and recommendations. To keep the session more interactive, we request the presenter to limit their presentations between 5 to 8 minutes so that maximum time can be utilized for the audience participations via Q&A, which shall commence collectively after the 4 presentations. I would like to now request Saif Ali from Dastagir Technologies to please present policy statements on Theme 1, Pre-Investment Factors responsible for the promotion of venture capital companies in Pakistan.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you. Thank you to our honorary chief guests. Thank you to NUST and MOST for putting this together. Fantastic forum, and exciting to see that government and policy stakeholders are interested in, creating a more conducive environment to propagate further investment in Pakistan. So our working group was supposed to discuss and make our humble suggestions on what should be done as sort of a pre-working before the investment bid actually comes in. So a lot of this, what you might see when the slide eventually shows up, may be a little redundant and may be covered by other working groups as well. But nevertheless, we still feel that this is very relevant, very core to the discussion that we're having today. Quick intro to myself. I'm Saif Ali. I'm a general manager at Dastagir Technologies. We are a venture-backed B2B e-commerce startups. So we're trying to solve the fragmented supply chain for small to medium-sized retailers in Pakistan, which collectively represent about $120 billion opportunity. just in this country. So we are one of 5 venture-backed companies competing for the same pie, and it's a very interesting market to be in. I want to introduce the rest of my working group real quick. We had Mr. Rifat Pravez, Executive Director General of the Board of Investment, Dr. Ghulam Sarwar from the HEC. He's in the Research for Innovation Department. Engineer Ehsan Mirza, Director of the Business Incubation Center at IIU. Mr. Faisal Aftab, of course, who you've already met. Mr. Rao Sabir Ali Khan, who's the Chief Business Development Officer at NUST. I'm Sef, and of course we had Fahad Tanveer, who's the founder of EdCasa, which is an ed tech company. Now, moving into our recommendations for what needs to be done is we firmly believe that we need to employ a triple helix model to bring academia, government, and industry on the same page to actually make something happen, right? And we've listed out a couple of acronyms here that you can read, if you'd like. And the idea is that right now, a lot of the success that we're seeing, companies like mine and a lot of other startups who have raised that $300 million number this year are operating in silos. That is happening on an individual level. There's no national framework, there's no national narrative, and there's no one facilitating that narrative either to propagate further investment, further growth, further empowerment of new founders, new talent, new startups coming in. So if we have that triple helix model, academia will come in, make that capacity building happen. Government will come in, make that policy environment happen, and then industry will come in with the learnings of what we know has already worked, with the playbooks that we've developed, right? And for that purpose, it's essential for all stakeholders to develop an in-depth understanding of what the startup ecosystem is. So it's very important to differentiate the startup ecosystem from the SME ecosystem, right? So initiatives like SMIDA have worked really well to support maybe someone who wants to set up a small karkhana or a workshop or wants to open a small store. That does not work for technology businesses because we're trying to operate on hyper growth. We need a different kind of capital. We need a different kind of talent. It's a completely different kind of operating mindset that all these stakeholders also need to be privy of before they can develop policy to support it. And in order to facilitate those stakeholders, the idea was, our suggestion, our humble suggestion, was that we set up a one-stop shop portal where all of us can communicate with each other, and all this information that I'm talking about right now that might sound like a lot of word vomit is easily accessible, broken down for the average man. I speak to people across the ecosystem. That includes young talent, that includes founders, includes operators, and so many of them have no clue on some of the basics that are required if you're getting into this game. How to set up a holding company in Singapore, how to bring in money into Pakistan without killing yourself in taxes, how to set up the right teams, how to build a product. There's a lot of this expertise now, right in this room actually, but it's not accessible to the average man. Incubation centers and places like NUST are stepping in to fill that gap, but again, selection criteria and capacity issues leave a lot more room to be done. So that one-stop shop can maybe fill that gap to democratize that access to knowledge. Moving forward, whoever's operating this PC, the next thing is, needs to be an enabling environment for the development of startups and founders, right? So I earlier mentioned academia and capacity building. So like I said, all of this knowledge that we have can be passed on. That knowledge transfer can occur from industry to academia. So even at a university level, when young kids are graduating with a keen interest on getting into this ecosystem, they're graduating with that knowledge in hand of how to actually do the nitty-gritty details that it takes to become a founder, right? How to set up your company, how to incorporate it, what kind of taxation you need to know about, how to hire people, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really important to make that happen. To again further that growth, right? So IP creation and facilitation, there's very little awareness on IP creation in Pakistan, right? And again, that has a lot to do, so IPO can play a major role there in building awareness for this ecosystem in particular. Government, again, can do a lot more in terms of regulations to provide further tax incentives to investors to make it an even more attractive destination for venture capital firms, international venture capital firms to park their money. Right? So some of the great initiatives we've seen in STZA would be great if they were applied wholesale for the entire ecosystem. Again, I don't have an actionable suggestion for how that can happen, but we need to do what we can to make it as attractive a destination as possible for international venture dollars. And capital market incentives, sorry, before I go on to that, there's another point I want to mention, that we have some of the best talent in the world. And I can tell you this firsthand. We have an engineering team of about 25 people, and I've been working with engineers for my whole career. Top talent, worldwide. And the problem is that the rest of the world has figured this out. And we are suffering from brain drain. This is not a new problem. I'm sure you're all aware of this. What is happening right now, what's happened in 2021 especially, is nothing short of a revolution. This is a true watershed moment. This is a historic time. And these stakeholders that I'm talking about in this triple helix can also very easily own this narrative, take this charge and create a campaign or something to fight that brain drain. Right? So if you're in tech and maybe you're talking to students in tech or young talent in tech, build that narrative and put that information out there that no, you need to stay here and build for Pakistan. Because most of these startups that are raising venture money it's not just about the commercials. So if I tell you about Dastagir, like I mentioned to you, we're solving real problems for small retailers. And by small, I mean a Kiryana store, right, whose average income on a monthly basis is below 100,000 rupees. And if we're solving inefficiencies in his supply chain, we're adding to his income. And if we're adding to his income, he can afford to expand his business, which ultimately contributes more to the GDP of this country. That's huge, right? And there's no such narrative that exists right now. And we're allowing that brain drain to happen. We're allowing the Amazons and the Googles of the world to steal our engineers, our operators, only because they can afford to pay them more. But we need to build that narrative that even now these tech companies who have raised money are paying above market average, offering world-class cultures, offering amazing international collaboration opportunities, amazing learning, and again, the opportunity to give back and build for your country. So ultimately, that's all I have for you. Last thing I'd like to add that is really important is we all need to work on a pathway to exit as best as we can. This will increase investor confidence tenfold, I firmly believe. Right now, it remains to be seen how and when and where this will happen, because we don't have a case study as of yet, right? We don't know which that company will be, when it will happen, and so we need to have that policy drafting start happening now, right? And we can start quoting that to investors to assuage some of their concerns. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you, guys. Any questions? Should I stay here for questions?
We'll take you in the end.
Done.
Thank you, Saif, to you and all your group members for invaluable contribution for today. Our next theme is Theme 2, Institutional Structure and Support for the Growth of VC Firms. I would request Barrister Uzair Ahmed to please present this.
Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Assalamu alaikum, chief guest, ordinary dignitaries, startups, NUST, and member from NSTP. So Saif talked about a lot of things around the challenges that startups are facing and how and what the ecosystem can do and regulators can do with respect to making it possible for the ecosystem to grow. Our working group and talks more about how we can have more venture capital funds incorporate themselves in Pakistan. An interesting statistics for many of you we would already know, but there are about 14 or 15 VC firms operating in Pakistan or are focused on Pakistan. Only one of them is registered in Pakistan. There is a reason for that, and we try to discuss it in our working group and maybe make some recommendations so that the government can do something about it. So let me first introduce my members within the working group. We had Mr. Abid Nazir, who joined digitally. He is part of the EPD team of the State Bank. We also had Misbah Naqvi, who is one of the general partners at I2I Ventures. She also joined digitally. Other members included Mr. Adil. He's from the Science Diplomacy Wing of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We had Ms. Saima Kanwal, Deputy Director from the IPO office. Mr. Umar Yahya, he is an additional Joint Director at the ICCP. Mr. Khurram Shahzad, he runs a firm called Alpha Beta Core. Mr. Umar Ghani, myself, Dr. Athar Osama, he's an investor as well as somebody who's interested in the edtech space. Mr. Asim Ghaffar, he is co-founder of this company called Easy Fresh, which is trying to solve grocery delivery in Pakistan. Mr. Faisal Sherjan, he is a veteran of the industry. He currently is at Collabs. He used to run NIC at Lahore and work with NIC in Peshawar. Mr. Tanveer Khalik, Miss Noreen Fatma, Mr. Mustafa Khan, who is a chartered accountant, Misbah Khalil Khan, Misbah Khalil Khan, CEO Cordoba Logistics and Venture, and finally Misbah Naqvi. So we had a very interactive session. We talked about a lot of things, and I'll try to summarize some of the suggestions that came out of it. So first thing, I'm going to talk about more on a broader scale, and I think everybody who's sitting here will echo those. I don't think there is any challenge here with respect to the suggestions, but I think it's as a government, at a policy level, maybe we need to keep on regurgitating the same point because these are important. So number one, no investor is going to put money in Pakistan if there is lack of consistency. We often suffer from this because whether it is between one government to the next or it is even within the same government, there is a constant change in policy. And it is very important that investors feel a certain amount of certainty and consistency with respect to the policies of the government. One good example of this, and I'll be talking about it a little later as well, is around tax breaks. So for the investors of VC funds, a certain tax break was promised to them, which was supposed to last until 2024. In the beginning of this year, this was taken away without any consultation and without any conversation around it. The second aspect we discussed about, unfortunately we had representative of IPO office on hand, was with respect to enforcement of intellectual property. So all of the startups and all of the work that we are talking about as with respect to fourth industrial revolution, the biggest asset is intellectual property, and protection and enforcement of that intellectual property is paramount. We all, as part of the working group, commended the work NUST has done in this space. It has a fantastic team that has worked towards IP filings with respect to patent registrations. It has a policy at the very least with respect to how its academia and its student work. I've been fortunate to work with NUST with respect to some of the IP licensing that they have done around the technologies that are coming out of research at NUST, but unfortunately it is an exception to the norm. So we have over 200 universities. None of the rest have very solid foundation with respect to intellectual property, and therefore this was a recommendation we had for the government at a policy level. And the third general comment that we mentioned was enforcement of contracts. I was looking at one of this presentation where an international company was looking to invest in Pakistan, and in that slide of pros and cons, the cons included enforcement of contracts, and therefore everybody talks about it, everybody knows what it is, but we need to find ways to have contracts enforced in Pakistan and make our legal system better than what it is right now. And whatever role that the government can play, it must, because it is a very important aspect. Next slide, please. So going into a little bit of specifics, allow me to give you a little bit of a background. The VC legal structure is covered under the SECP. The regulations are called Private Fund Regulations 2015, and one of the conversations we had was that unfortunately, unfortunately the VC registration and VC incorporation and process of setting up a VC is clubbed together with the process of a private equity fund. And there is a fundamental difference of concept with respect to a VC fund versus a private equity fund. And so at a conceptual level, the idea was to maybe make the process of setting up a VC fund separated. So as I said, fortunately, we had representative from SECP on hand, and one of the reasons why this has not happened or why we still are facing this is because the tax law is clubbing private equity and venture capital together in one place. And I'm going to echo what Saif was mentioning, that it is very important for these different arms of the government to come together, have a conversation, and maybe clearly articulate where one aspect of the VC landscape can benefit, and how tax, for example, the FBR can facilitate in that respect. And I've already mentioned it to everybody. The tax break that was available to limited partners or investors within VC funds was taken away at the beginning of this year. I had issues, frankly, with the way tax break were originally given as well, because they had a hard deadline of 2024, and it didn't make sense, because for the simple reason, if you are a VC investor, and we've got some eminent VC investors here, they'll tell you that if you make an investment, it is 5-6 years down the road that you get a reward out of it. And VC is essentially a risk in an entrepreneur, that entrepreneur is going to make it big, and there is a probability of failure as well. And what you can't afford to have a situation where even if you reinstate that original tax break, if that one exit happens in 2025, there is no clarity with respect to the law whether there will be any incentive that would exist. So currently we don't have any tax incentives, to talk about 2024, but we were discussing it internally, and we recommended that if you want to encourage, so currently most of the investments that are happening are capital that is coming from abroad, but we see examples within the different economies that if you have local investors putting local money, it gains it increases the confidence of the international investor as well. And so we would want to encourage local investors by giving them tax incentives so that they put money in these startups. Next slide, please. So the third aspect was more to do with the role of the different stakeholders within the ecosystem. It can be, for example, the HECs, it can be the legal system, it can be the tax system. So what are the different government ministries, what sort of role that they can play with respect to encouraging and facilitating startups? And we, again, because we had the good fortune of representative from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for example, we discussed various facilitation that those ministries can provide. For example, currently, the process of getting an international investor to put money in Pakistan is unbelievably complicated. You need to get documents attested by the Pakistani consulate, and some consulates are incredibly efficient, and sometimes it can take many months to get that process completed before you can actually put money in a Pakistani startup. So these kind of frictions are the reason why we don't have a lot of local VCs. They would much rather be domiciled abroad and have the startups also have holdcos abroad. So we talked about the role of the HEC around improving its curriculum with respect to how different startups can be facilitated, different industries can come into it around the knowledge economy. We talked about the relevant programs that are being offered. There is definitely some fantastic examples, but obviously we felt as a group that the role of the HEC can be improved. And industry linkages, we talk about it, we want to do something about it, but unfortunately it's lacking. So the academia industry linkages, again, as Saf was mentioning, I'm just echoing what he said, that needs to be improved, and the way to do that is for HEC to play a much more realistic approach around encouraging the monetization of the research that is happening in the universities. Next slide, please. Okay, so this was an interesting conversation. We unfortunately couldn't spend a lot of time on it, but we have a couple of very well-known international examples of national level funds being set up where, for example, there was a matching system famously in Israel where they were funding startups where if you raise $1 million from a private VC, the government was matching it. We see other examples around the world as well. I know that there is some examples of this in Pakistan as well, where we have HEC, for example, making some matching some expenses, for example, but not at the scale that we are talking about. So if there is government wants to do something about it, one of the ways is to essentially make a program of that nature where international or local VCs invest with the knowledge that the state is also supporting that ecosystem. So this was the broad contours of the conversation we had. We can take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Moving forward, we have theme number 3, which will be presented by Mr. Tariq Naseem, Additional Director, Security Exchange Corporation of Pakistan. The theme is Existing Regulatory Framework for VC Firms. And we are short on time, sir. We will request to make it brief.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। ग्रुप 3 राइट साइड पे बैठे हुए मैं उनको रिप्रेजेंट कर रहा हूँ। प्रोफेशनल्स मेरी टीम में जो शामिल थे उसमें इन्वेस्टर्स भी हैं, एंटरप्रेन्योर्स भी हैं, रेगुलेटर्स भी हैं और ऑब्वियसली इंटरेस्टेड ग्रुप्स जो एकेडेमिया से है वो भी हैं। तो मैं क्विकली टीम मेंबर्स के नाम रिपीट नहीं करूँगा, यू कैन सी ऑन द स्क्रीन, बट ऑन द नेक्स्ट स्लाइड आई वुड लाइक टू हाईलाइट द की इशूज़ that pertains to the theme 3, that our SECP regulations for obtaining license is difficult. This is an argument presented by the investors and fund managers as well, and I want to update you on that SECP promulgated private fund regulations in 2015 after updating the existing regulatory framework of 2018, but those regulations was further revamped in 2020, and now the regulations have all those impediments removed that were highlighted during the public consultation stage. So under the present regulatory framework, you can find much of the flexibility that is needed by the fund managers and investors in Pakistan. Secondly, another issue that was highlighted was the hurdles faced by the investors, mutual fund investors and fund managers are the regulatory framework of SECP, FBR and State Bank of Pakistan. Next, some complaints or some suggestion was aimed at the post-approval stage where due diligence take time and take considerable amount of efforts by the fund manager and the investors. Next, please. So our suggestion and recommendation were very specific. Number one, SECP needs to amend its regulations to introduce flexibility allowing private funds to invest in businesses that are not in company form. Presently, the present regulations do not allow any investments other than businesses that are operating in company form. Secondly, we want to suggest to State Bank to consider to differentiate between the private fund established, licensed and domiciled in Pakistan as compared to those private funds that are established abroad and that do not have any regulatory oversight of any Pakistani agency. Lastly, the FBR framework that is applicable on the private fund, venture fund is taxation regime for the private fund. So we have specific suggestion on that front as well on the next slide, please. So first of all, the tax withdrawal, the pass-through status withdrawal by the FBR in March 2021. So we want to suggest to the government and the FBR is to consider that private fund is a vehicle, not a company, not a business. Therefore, it should not be taxed like a business. I want to put an example in front of you is that now under the present regulatory framework, if a private fund invest in a business at multiple levels, it attracts corporate tax. For example, investee company is obliged to discharge 29% tax at its income. And then when investee company distribute dividend, it again attract a 15% tax on dividend. Similarly, after the withdrawal of this pass-through status for private fund, now private fund income will also be subject to a 29% corporate tax. And then when private fund distribute that income to the investors, it will also attract dividend tax of 15%. And at the third stage, if the investor is a corporate entity, it will again oblige to discharge a tax of 29%. So you can see a multiple layer of taxation is applicable because of the structure of the private fund that are being established in Pakistan. And that this is one of the main reasons that we are unable to see attraction in the locally domiciled private fund, and we have very limited number of private fund in Pakistan. Another important point that I want to make here is that we heard that this argument many times that under the IMF deal, we were required to withdraw the tax pass-through status available to the private fund industry in Pakistan. But ironically, when you see the literature published by the IMF itself, that literature suggests governments to introduce pass-through status for private fund and institutions like that. It also advocates granting incentives to such type of funds. So under the present regulatory framework and the infrastructure and the framework of the FBR, if you see the similar pass-through status is already available to the mutual fund industry as well as REIT industry. So there is a genuine demand from the local private fund that the private fund in Pakistan should be a pass-through vehicle whereby the ultimate investors will be obliged to pay tax, not the fund itself. So, so our next suggestion would be the actual fund managers are facing hurdles that investee companies sometimes are subject to some requirement to procure from a vendor that is registered with the tax, and therefore they need proper tax invoices to claim that expenses in their accounts. But unfortunately, at many times they are not able to procure their needs from such vendors that are registered with tax authorities and are able to provide them with the invoices that are eligible under the tax laws. So the withholding tax requirements and the sale tax requirements need to be looked into, particularly from the perspective of startups and innovative businesses. Next slide, please. So from the State Bank of Pakistan, it is being recommended that the requirement presently applicable to regulate through foreign exchange manual for cash inflows and outflows are manual and cumbersome, and many attached requirements are difficult to comply with. It is being suggested that this process needs to be automated to the maximum possible level and simplified. Secondly, the foreign domiciled venture funds also need to raise funds from local market. So presently there is a restriction that does not allow foreign domiciled VC funds to raise capital market locally. So it is being recommended that this restrictions to be removed. And finally, the legal recourse needs to be strengthened. As mentioned in the previous discussion as well, that many foreigners, investors and funds, when see the contract enforcement mechanism available in the country and the judicial system, they include that in their risk parameters and enhance their risk beta, and therefore they require more return and more associate more cost to the investment in Pakistan. So if we are able to implement such a judicial system, for example, through establishment of dedicated tribunals that can speed up the cases pertaining to contract enforcement, we think that will also help in developing the private fund domiciled in Pakistan. So this is it from our group 3, and we will welcome any questions thereon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Our last theme for today is addressing and removing information asymmetry in the ecosystem, for which I would request Mr. Wasim Khan, Director, SCCP, to deliver.
Thank you very much. I'm Wasim Khan from SCCP, and you can see the interest of SCCP in the VC environment, that we have maximum participation from the SCCP in this conference. So I will move directly to the recommendations due to limitation of times. So the theme of our group was regarding the addressing and the removing information asymmetry in the ecosystem. Currently, there is a lack of a central depository or information network where the different people can review the information regarding the overall VC environment in the country, covering the data set, policies, procedures, and the linkage of different things. So the group recommended that we should have development of information portal owned by government entity, having information dashboard on regulatory framework, policies, list of investors, venture capital funds, angel investors, potential startup, along with the integration with the relevant government stakeholders. So this needs a government intervention for creation of this network. The second is there should be a technology platform which provide infrastructure and allied services that include payment channels, verification from regulatory bodies like SCCP, NADRA, BOI, EOBI, FBI, and IPOs. General awareness. This conference is a very good initiative, and we have to take this initiative further by taking a general awareness and image building through multiple mechanisms, including global VC conference for image building of the Pakistan VC conference, which will give the overall information regarding the VC culture in Pakistan. Then in the last 2 and 3 years, a lot of regulatory changes has been made in the VC framework, including VC funds structures, companies ordinance, taxations, foreign exchange regime, but there is no proper campaign of these recent changes for the stakeholders. So we recommend that there should be a proper public awareness of the recent regulatory changes, taxation changes, and foreign exchange changes for the market participants. And necessary changes also in the regulatory framework for local domiciled VC funds, which have already identified by Mr. Tariq and other participants. And there should be a monitor mechanism for these policy recommendations. There should be a proper evaluation. There should be a proper mechanism for review of this implementation of these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone who wants to ask a question pertaining to the themes as flashed on the screen may raise their hand, and the respective presenter or any other member from the concerned group will answer to it. Ladies and gentlemen, the House is open for questions. Sir.
The second last speaker, who during his presentation said that, we have differentiated between the local VCs and the foreign VCs. Why to differentiate? Why are you differentiating? Why can't they be treated equally?
So there are two reasons. One, the locally domiciled private funds are regulated in Pakistan. They are accountable here. They are subject to regulatory requirements that they need to comply with. Whereas in case of foreign domiciled funds, for example, a fund established in Cayman Island, you would not be knowing that who is the actual owner holding the actual ownership. You will not be knowing the source of funding coming from. You will not be knowing the exact framework they are operating there under. So locally domiciled VC funds are required to be registered with SCCP, whereas foreign domiciled VC funds are not required to be registered anywhere in Pakistan, and they are not subject to oversight of any agency in government in Pakistan.
No, my question was obviously जो regulatory वो होता है वो तो ठीक है and I understand. लेकिन as far as facilities or concessions or are concerned, I think that they should be the same for both. If you want to encourage the foreign investor, that's fine, but not at the cost of the local investor. I mean, he should be treated equally, as specially as the foreign one. That's
Sir, the recommendation was limited to the treatment available under the foreign exchange manual, where they are subject to multiple reporting requirements. Our recommendation was you can ask lesser requirements for the locally domiciled VC funds, whereas you can have more reporting requirements for the foreign domiciled private funds. So it was about to control the cash flow that is coming in and going out under the foreign exchange regulations, sir.
So I actually ran the first institutional fund in Pakistan that was locally domiciled, which was Laxon Venture Capital. And you're absolutely right. There were lots of restrictions in terms of taxation of management fees. So to pay good resources, it was difficult, in terms of retaining talent. Number two, as you guys mentioned already, the other issue was layers of taxation. So there's a taxation at the fund level, and then when it's distributed to individuals, there's another set of taxation. So those can be combined. In terms of foreign funds, because now I'm a Cayman Island-based fund, because most of my investors are US investors, UK and Middle Eastern investors. The private fund laws are fairly congruent under OECD, Common Reporting Standards, and under FATF. So for example, every investor that's come in my fund has gone through a stringent KYC standard, not by me, by Leeward Management, which is a third-party regulated entity, and it's as difficult as opening a bank account in Pakistan or any other jurisdiction. So source of funds are vetted, and actually the number one target is source of funds. So yes, there is a security layer to things that I do agree that if someone is investing from a hostile country, our security agencies should scrutinize some of this capital, but unfortunately that takes time. So just wanted to highlight that difference, that I don't think regulating foreign funds and foreign capital is good for the country in the long run, because then you're not getting foreign direct investment.
Assalamu alaikum. मेरा क्वेश्चन जो है वो शिबली साहब से है, and I am a US investor, came back after 18 years to Pakistan. आज से 18 और 20 साल पहले मैं इसी तरह की एक कॉन्फ्रेंस में था, and we were facing exactly the more or less 80% of the same questions and obstacles. तो मेरा क्वेश्चन सिर्फ ये है कि इस वक्त the moment is right, we have a lot of potential and momentum outside the Pakistan where people are looking for the investments. How we can eradicate, those issues? How fast we can eradicate? ये जो आपने बताया, मैं खुद नहीं अकाउंट खोल सका अभी तक. 1-1.5 महीना हो गया मुझे आए हुए यहाँ. I cannot open my account because I am a US citizen. तो ये जो मसले हैं इनको if we cannot resolve, how come a foreign investment can actually come to Pakistan? So that is my question, sir. I think जो इस वक्त गवर्नमेंट के initiatives हैं, and especially NUST. When I came to NUST and I look at the NSTP, I cannot believe it. Actually, the tears were in my eyes कि पाकिस्तान में इस तरह का भी setup कोई बन सकता है.
Thank you.
So I will take a very, very success story with me back to US, that people should come here, they look at these setups, and they bring investment, even if it's a small chunk, but please come. Okay, thank you.
This was for me? Okay, sorry. Nee, I totally agree with you. The problem is that we talk big, but we tend to ignore the smaller things. Like you're mentioning that you couldn't open your account. I mean, that's preposterous. Like these things small steps or whatever formalities, they have to be investor friendly. I totally agree with you that if on one side we always are brandishing all that thick books, the rules, regulations, I mean, they are man-made, and they should also change with the changing times. This is what our requirement is, be it SECP, be it State Bank of Pakistan, be it any other authorities. They have to make things simple, investor friendly, and there should be no discrimination, as I said in my earlier question, that there shouldn't be any difference between the foreign and the local. They should be both treated royally. Period. So I think that, you know, whoever are the concerned people, they will obviously look into this as to how, because it's a complete, it's a value chain, so to say, that, you know, starting from the simplest steps like opening account, all the way to repatriating your dividends or whatever your investment, they should be very simple, clear, and should be, as they say, user-friendly mechanism. So I agree, and, you know, we should be working on that, and but I'm sure that the concerned people will have gone through this and they will address these issues.
Thank you, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Abdul Muiz. I work at a software company by the name of iEngineering. STZA was mentioned a lot, so I would take this take some time to mention that my company was the first to sign an MOU with STZA to set up a technology park within the Islamabad Technopolis. And right now I'm transitioning to a startup in Lahore where we've acquired $1 million from Indus Valley Capital. So I have two questions, and they come under two categories. The first is the bureaucracy. The second is with regards to what Mr. Faisal was talking about, was data. As far as the bureaucracy is concerned, the STZA once held a kind of consultation conference with multiple stakeholders. They included consultancies like McKinsey, PwC, and a lot of tech companies to basically inform them that they want to create a one window portal for licensing and registration within the STZA. The problem, apart from the constant badgering of that they were really underestimating the level of effort, was each stakeholder basically questioned that how is it that they expect to cut the red tape by just signing 36 MOUs with every government entity possible, be it the FPR, SCCP, or any other for that matter. The second question that I have really is, I was listening to a podcast that featured Mr. Nadeem Hussain, who is the owner of Planet 10, and he was basically talking about empowering the fintech ecosystem. But at the heart of his conversation was really how, because at the heart of this conference really is the flow of capital, transactions really. And basically what his suggestion was that we utilize our smart card, our CNIC, the way that India utilizes Aadhaar system. Basically make it make our CNIC kind of a one-stop shop, a one-stop repository for data verification for any document for that matter, and minimize the cost associated with that transaction to empower multiple transactions and widen the base and incorporate as many of Pakistani citizens as possible. So is that a possibility alongside these regulations?
These questions were supposed to be from the working groups. However, I would request anyone from the SCZA, I believe Sir Faisal can answer to this question, please.
Sure. So I'll answer I do agree with you that the national ID card, which by the way, Pakistan was way ahead of the curve. India's Andahar is only, I think, 2016, whereas we did this in 2002. And I can't recall the stats, but a fair chunk of the adult population in Pakistan has the chip-based ID card, which is what is needed for this adoption. So I do agree with you 100% on this, that that has to be the case in Pakistan, where people should use their NIC everywhere. That way we'll have their data pattern recognition, spending patterns, behavioral patterns, all documented. I think PRAL already has a silo of a goldmine of data that if that was unlocked, that would offer credit to every individual. The way, I think what's more important, an important component of this is how the lending structure is changing in the world. So right now you're applying through applications, they're verifying through paper, making you basically, go up and down to give you a little bit of credit. That's going to change on your behavioral pattern and on credit scoring engines. So for example, if somebody has utility bill payment histories that are digitally logged and they're making payments regularly, somebody has, let's say they're purchasing electronics online. These behavioral patterns, about anywhere from 150 to 160 data points in advanced countries, are being used to determine the credit worthiness of a person, and loans are being issued instantaneously, from micro loans, nano loans, and then also working capital financing for companies and SMEs. On the STZA part, what was the question, if you could specifically, that you needed?
Really, it was one about implementation. Basically, the STZA was faced with the same question, that even though that they've signed 36 MOUs with all government entities, but how is it that they're going to cut through the red tape? How are they going to ensure that what they're saying is going to be implemented, basically?
Got it. Okay. Yeah, so I was fairly skeptical of the STZA as well, in my personal opinion, initially, until they were able to actually get it pushed through in terms of a regulation. The initial was the ordinance, which is always weak. But then for them to actually get it pushed through, in my opinion, was basically the specialized zone that is now there. In terms of the incentives that they're offering, if you build it, they will come. So right now, it's at a concept stage. Once the State Life building in Islamabad, I believe that they've identified as one of the spots, you're going to start to see companies move in, because if for example, some of my startups, they're operating companies that are registered in Pakistan, I would encourage them to incorporate in the STZA for the incentives, so that they can bring in computers and other equipment and take advantage of all the tax exemptions. So I think it's a gradual process. I believe they've already gotten the manufacturers like Oppo and Samsung to set up locally.
Well, I really didn't want to comment on this because it is in the process. But I do understand what you are referring to, that STZAs, they are in a very primary stage, and they have certain things to sort out. What we at Ministry of Science and Technology, what we plan to do, or what we are planning, and what we are already doing this, that we have a lot of infrastructure, we have a lot of installations where those particular installations can be converted or given the same status of STZA, so that instantly, we can offer those facilities, those concessions and whatever, if they are declared. So it's in the process, and I think that maximum in a month's time, we would be able to put it legally on ground and declare different, across the country, different institutions that we have, declare them as STCs. You have the infrastructure, you can, it's like almost ready-made. So there's going to be a lot of improvement in that.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dr. Abid, CEO 2ID, a company based out of NSDP. My question is more on the execution side. So how we are going to connect VCs with the startups? Right now it seems that the startups has to go to the VCs, approach the VCs. So my suggestion would be to have regular demo days at NICs or NSTP, where the VCs are invited actually to evaluate the startup firms. So this is my suggestion, how we are going to connect VCs with the startups.
I would like to redirect this question to theme number 4 representative, the information asymmetry part. This is what we have gathered here for today, to actually remove the impediments and make this process smooth. Representative of theme number 4 may please answer this question.
Yeah, this is a very good suggestion, and we have already discussed this in our group, and we have already recommended that there should be a mechanism for sharing the information between the VC funds and between the incubation centers and between the startups. So, and there should be a proper awareness mechanism for this arrangement.
Okay. Thank you. Due to paucity of time, we may not be able to take more questions.
No, I have to.
We will take just one more question.
One more last question.
One last question, and then we move to our next segment.
Achha, this is Syed Arif Muneem from OGPay Pakistan Private Limited. And we have a company in United Kingdom as a fintech company. It's OGPay Limited in United Kingdom, and we are working in United Arab Emirates as well. So it's a fintech company. It's working on wallet-to-wallet payments, and we have been trying from last 1 year to get an electronic money institute license in Pakistan. And unfortunately, it's really hard for companies outside Pakistan to get these kind of licenses. And we were the ones who actually tried to get the in-principle activity approval. And we were the ones who got license from SECP to act as a EMI. All the companies in Pakistan which are working at the moment, they were working as information technology or as a finance company as an activity. So we were the ones who came to SECP and told them that Electronic Money Institute is a different activity and they need to add it in. And after that, we tried to get the in-principle activity approval from State Bank of Pakistan, but still we are in process and it's taking a long time. And you know, even to get, there is a prerequisite from State Bank to get a trust agreement. One of my colleagues was talking about banking. So we tried to get the trust agreement from a bank called MCB, and it took us at least 3 to 4 months to get it, which normally takes in UK or United Kingdom or UAE like 1 or 2 weeks. So, you know, the decision makers themselves, they don't understand new technologies which are in fintech, and it's really hard for them to understand it. And unfortunately, it takes too long for companies coming from UAE or from other parts of the world and to work with them. So what I request to people sitting here, there was a director from SECP, Mr. Wasim Khan. I think he might be knowing it because we were speaking to a lot of people from Securities Exchange Commission of Pakistan on this. So I want the decision makers and the government to actually make something like this technology, because these things are there already in United Arab Emirates. In Dubai, they're already working on this. So I feel if they just have some things like that, and they can help the investors and the new companies which are coming in fintech or agri-tech or health tech, and try to give them solutions to get them registered earlier than 6 months or 1 year. Because if they take that much longer time to get registered, I don't understand when they will do the business, the real business which they want to do in Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Please hand over the mic to Wasim Saab here.
You need to understand one thing upfront. As a regulator, we understand your problems, but the issue is, our dilemma is, we need to find solutions within the law that is available to us to regulate this sector. Unfortunately, this space is being regulated under a law which is almost 30 years old. And you will be pleased to know that we have moved a new law, the the new Ndfc law, that has been approved by the cabinet recently, and that will be in the parliament soon. So the new law will enable us to frame regulations that are more flexible, the more entertaining, and whereby we have the required flexibility to create a regulatory environment, a regulatory framework that will address the innovative solutions that you are talking about to bring in the country.
Sir, the regulations are there already from State Bank of Pakistan for Electronic Money Institute. They're already there. And you were speaking about NBFC companies. That is totally different from Electronic Money Institute. So we are talking about funds which are more than $500 million in Electronic Money Institute. There was a company recently which got $100 million investment called Tag Innovations. So NBFC is something which is in past, which you're talking about for like Jazz Cash or Easy Pesa. That is something old. So this, which we are talking about Electronic Money Institute, that is something new. And the regulations are already available in State Bank of Pakistan. Unfortunately, from State Bank of Pakistan, information was not passed properly to SECP, and people in SECP, they didn't know about it. So I don't know why this gentleman doesn't know about Electronic Money Institute.
This is your specific case, so we can review, you can discuss with us, we can give you your contact details, we will review that, what we can do to solve your issue.
Your question has been noted. Of course, this will be a part of the proceeding of this conference. And of course, lawmaking or whatever requirement is there for the facilitation, we will take note of it.
Because we have angel investors who are ready to invest from $500 million up to $1 billion in this industry. And there are some well-known people, my CEO of the company who is in Dubai, his name is Mohammed Ibrahim Khan. He's in UAE and UK. And they are ready to invest a lot of money in Pakistan, but unfortunately, if we don't get support, and there are a lot of people, other people, angel investors, who want to invest in Pakistan, but if we don't get support from the decision makers, then it would be very hard for us to...
Your suggestion has been noted.
Thank you.
मैं जी अगर comment करूं, because ये बड़ी अहम बात कर रहे हैं और जाहिर है कि बातें बहुत होती हैं, लेकिन unfortunately मसाइल वहीं के वहीं पे रहते हैं. बिल्कुल आप दुरुस्त कह रहे हैं कि ये एक ऐसा सीमलेस मैकेनिज्म होना चाहिए जिसमें कि जितने भी ये प्रॉब्लम्स इनके खड़े होते हैं, जो कंसर्न लोग हैं, मतलब है कि उसमें अगर लॉज में चेंज है तो प्लीज़ तब भी लाएं, हमें अप्रोच करें, रेलेवेंट मिनिस्ट्रीज़ को अप्रोच करें कि ये इस तरह हो नहीं सकता कि हम रास्ते में कांटे बिछाए हुए हों और कहें कि जी इन्हीं पत्थरों पे चल के अगर आ सको तो आओ. तो ये इस तरह होता नहीं है. हमें बिल्कुल, हम आपकी जो बात है उसको बिल्कुल ऐसे ले रहे हैं कि आप बिल्कुल 100% दुरुस्त कह रहे हैं, और हमने वी हैव टू मेक अमेंड्स, और हमें ये करनी चाहिए. I mean nobody has the time and there are so many alternatives. Why should one come here? क्यों आए? They are बेहतर जगह हैं हमारे मुल्क से. तो जब हम नहीं फैसिलिटेट करेंगे, इस किस्म की चीज़ें आएंगी. ये तो बड़े अमाउंट्स की बात कर रहे हैं, इवन छोटे अमाउंट्स के लिए भी हमें ये करना चाहिए. और आई श्योर यू कि हम आपकी इस इशू को देखेंगे और जो कंसर्न लोग हैं उनसे हम पूछेंगे कि इसको किस तरह से हम स्ट्रीमलाइन कर सकते हैं कि और किसी को ये इशू पेश ना आए.
Apart from the audience present here today, we have considerable online participation as well. We will take just one question from the online participants so that they may not feel left out.
So we have one question from online audience. Mr. Mursal has commented and asked a question from Mr. Faisal. Kindly shed some light and differentiate on what VCs look into while they are investing in pre-seed, seed, and Series A round. That's probably a question from a young startup.
Sure. So that's actually a very good question, because it's different stages of the life cycle of a startup. So as I mentioned earlier, these startups don't really stay startups, but they're still called startups. So to give you an example, Amazon was a startup. Now it's a $2 trillion company, or more than 2 trillion, I've lost track. So the stages in pre-seed, seed, Series A are just stages of growth. So pre-seed is typically an idea and a team with really nothing, not even a proof of concept. So it could be somebody that just simply thought of something. And then the way we make an assessment is the previous experiences of those founders. So and every fund has its own mandate. So the way they look at things is very different. In our case, we're a platform fund. We're agnostic to the sector, but we invest in founders that have some level of a scaling ability or relevant experience in order to scale that company. And our pre-seed rounds tend to be anywhere from $1.2 to $1.5 million at the initial level. The seed stage company now is typically a post proof of concept. And at that time, they need money for scaling. So historically, these rounds used to be smaller. Now in Pakistan, many of these companies are raising anywhere from $3 to $10 million. And that's accelerated growth where they can start to generate revenue, or they have, usually in seed stage, they have initial signs of revenue. Series A is more of an advanced company, even though it's an early stage company. But these companies by this time have demonstrated their actual product, and they're generating significant revenue. Or if you're a network effect based platform, you're generating month-on-month user growth. So over there, the analysis and pricing of the round is very different. For example, in seed stage, you just do something called a convertible note, also referred to as a safe, a Y Combinator safe, where you don't know how to value a company, so you just put a valuation cap. In Series A rounds, and the same thing happens in seed also. In Series A rounds, we have to price a company, so then we have to use actual metrics in order to how to assess what the valuation of the company will be. So it's very similar to valuing traditional companies.
Thank you, sir. We will return to more question and answer session after the chief guest speech. I would now request presenter of each working group to come on stage for award of shields as I call their names. I would request worthy chief guest and Rector Nast to please present the shield to our learned presenters. I would request Mr. Saif Ali to please come on stage to receive the shield on behalf of Working Group 1. Thank you. I would request Barrister Uzair Ahmed to please receive the shield on behalf of Working Group 2. Mr. Tariq Naseem for Working Group number 3. Mr. Wasim Khan on behalf of group number 4. I would request Mr. Faisal Aftab Saab to receive Guest of Honor Shield. Finally, I would request Rector Nast to present Event Shield to Honorable Chief Guest, Federal Minister for Science and Technology, Senator Shibli Farasa. Rector to please present the shield. I request His Excellency Senator Shibli Farasa, Federal Minister for Science and Technology, to deliver his closing remarks.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rector Nast, Pro-Rectors, Ministers, Government and Industrial Dignitaries, Venture Capitalists, Commandants and Principals, prestigious Nast faculty and officials, NSTP team and distinguished startups. Thank you for attending the Venture Capital and Startup Conference 2021, hosted by National University of Sciences and Technology under the auspices of Ministry of Science and Technology. Let me start by appreciating the unparalleled efforts of NUST in promoting a culture of research and innovation in the country and extending it at global level through its trailblazing initiatives such as the National Science and Technology Park and NUST Interdisciplinary Cluster for Higher Education. NUST indeed has an unparalleled track record of being the torchbearer and taking groundbreaking initiatives. I would like to congratulate the whole NSTP team on the park's 2nd anniversary. Government of Pakistan recognizes the importance of such initiatives and has taken a number of steps to facilitate the creation of an innovation ecosystem at national level. As Pakistan's first high-tech special economic zone, SEZs, NSTP is accelerating the country's transition into a thriving knowledge economy by offering a number of economic incentives to the park's residents. Prime Minister of Pakistan has also recently launched the Special Technology Zones Authority to provide legislative and institutional support for the development of national technology sector, which will support in development of a technology-driven knowledge ecosystem and encourage modern innovative solutions and futuristic entrepreneurship. In the same spirit of moving Pakistan towards digitalization, Pakistan Council for Science and Technology, PCST, is actively conducting surveys to identify and remove barriers to innovation while promulgating a culture of entrepreneurship. Recently, the government has also launched country's first investment platform, Park Impact Invest, to give tech startups access to early stage and growth funding apart from other initiatives such as Kamyab Pakistan, Kamyab Jawan, which offer soft loans with Pak rupees 100 billion and 170,000 skills education scholarships. Investment and financing opportunities are a key component of any startup and innovation ecosystem. Historically speaking, there has been a dearth of investment opportunities for startups in the country due to a variety of challenges and hurdles. However,